Hello and welcome to the Emagia AI for Finance podcast. This is your host, Brian Chappell, Director of Content for Emagia. Welcome back. Today we have a very special guest. We have Mark Shank from KPMG. He's been with the Big Four company for about 10 years. You are a principal at this point, doing cloud engineering. You've also done work with digital UX design and software engineering and digital and mobile services for KPMG. Before that, you were with the outfit Synergy, a private firm. Let's I guess get right into it and talk about some of your experiences in recent years, how you got to KPMG, what you've been really focusing on there, and when AI really came into the lens of focus for you and your colleagues for business and finance applications, in recent years.
Sure. It's great to be here, Brian. Thank you for having me on. From my side, you're right. I was with a startup that got acquired by KPMG about 10 years ago. That startup was very focused on delivering digital experiences, mostly in the mobile space. But we were a full stack shop. We would do the cloud engineering side on the back end and the mobile development on the front end and all the UI UX design. And KPMG wanted that kind of capability, and they thought it would be easier to get it started via acquisition. So they acquired that company, Synergy, and about 140 of us joined KPMG. It's been an interesting 10 years. I've really enjoyed my time there. I guess if I can be completely honest, as as a technologist and somebody that was really passionate in the space, I didn't think when we were going through this transaction 10 years ago that I'd still be at KPMG 10 years later. But that's how much they kind of turn my expectations of the Big Four upside down, and I've really enjoyed kind of riding these waves of technological innovation for the last decade and growing my career at KPMG. So you asked about AI and when did we really start getting into that? So actually the month before the acquisition of my old company, Synergy, that I was part of, there was a company called Link Analytics that got acquired by KPMG, and they were an AI company. And so back then, AI, it was generally building kind of predictive machine learning analytics models, hence the name analytics, that would it could be for predicting churn on a telecommunications network, right? So it's like, are you going to switch from AT&T to Verizon? Or it could be for doing bus scheduling. Big one for us was NBA. We worked with the NBA to create scheduling algorithm for all the team. And the investment started back then, and it was a huge investment. It was much bigger than that acquisition. KPMG started this whole thing called the Lighthouse. And so they really, the firm saw that AI was going to be a crucial part of business transformation and how businesses pivoted their operating models and how they worked, all the way through the front, middle, and back office to be positioned for the future. So it was a very significant investment for KPMG to stand this capability up, and over time these things kind of blended together, and what I mean by these things is this kind of UI UX capability, this engineering capability, this ability to kind of build and ship consumer facing software, and this need for these intelligent kind of insights that AI could generate. But what really what really just, and it was always a good business, and we always did really really cool and interesting things, and we worked together with our data scientists and everything to build models, and helping place retail brick and mortar stores, where was the best corner, how, like all kinds of different things to predict, and different kind of AI to create. And in the background there was stuff like chat, right? You have Watson winning Jeopardy, but it's kind of, it didn't capitalize on that cultural zeitgeist that it jumped in front of with Jeopardy, but you didn't really see that. That could have been ChatGPT, right? Like, but it didn't happen. And there was so much. It was so much a part of the talk if you go back in time to that. And there was there's this Watson product in the background, and Google, launched all of these kind of AI chat products, but they weren't really exploding. They weren't going through that crazy exponential growth, and all of that changed with the launch of ChatGPT. So, one of the kind of the big thing in the market that became different, there were specific use cases where you might purchase the third-party model. The ones that immediately come to mind to me are for like fraud or risk. If you scan your card at a random store in a random location and it gets flagged, there's some kind of AI machine learning trained model in the background somewhere denying that transaction, or sending you the text message saying, reply with a Y if you want to approve this kind of thing. And those are usually third-party models. The individual companies don't typically build those themselves; they buy them. But the idea of a general purpose third-party model, like what powers an experience like ChatGPT, is, in my opinion, pretty novel in the market, and it changed a lot of things. It's changed. We don't have to work with a company to build this crazy machine learning model that takes a ton of data to curate and build and ingest and everything to just get some baseline level of capability. You have this out of the box model that's pretty functional and can do a lot of really interesting things from the day that you interact with it, and then it's like, okay, well, how do I get my, you break it down into a few different categories, right? It's like, okay, what use cases is it good for just out of the box? I don't need to add anything to it. I just need to get it in the hands of my employees and show them how it's useful. To how do I get my data? Because these models have literally read the entire internet, over 1 trillion words have been consumed into the training of these models. This kind of unfathomable number. And, but it's read the internet in front of your firewall. It hasn't read the internet behind your firewall, right? So how do I get all the data, all my information, all my stuff that's behind my firewall available to be in these responses to the model, to give a degree of intelligent response that also is aware of my information. So that's kind of your next batch of use cases. And then you get into, really kind of the future leaning stuff, which is like, how can I use this to drive, automation and other things in my business that, were kind of previously not attainable almost with any degree of investment, or with such a degree of investment that it was, never even entertained. And you see this kind of productivity gain available to companies of all sizes because it's relatively cheap to get access to it out of the box. And so you get that, it's not just the biggest companies that can afford to hire PhDs and all these people to build stuff, which is what it was in the past. It's now available to, the entire economy, and small and medium business and large business as well, with use cases that really span the entire company. I mean, you pick an area and you can name some use cases where it's probably helpful today, and most people aren't using it today. They're a little wary of it for one reason or another, or maybe their company has some risk policies that haven't been approved. So it's been a really interesting past 18 months. It's been a kind of a crazy time to be in this space because there's been so many so many conversations, so much interest, and everybody kind of looking for a way to
I mean, it does feel in a way like you mentioned, Chat GPT kind of made things a bit more mainstream and a bit more accepted than maybe Watson did. I remember when Watson came around, that was still during an era where people didn't really, in the business world, didn't want to talk about, AI too much because it was still seen as like Terminator. It was still seen as job killer, and things like that. Whereas we know nowadays most of these things are being made with the idea, at least for now, of being co-pilots and augmenting and or changing than dismantling positions. But the Chat GPT thing from our perspective seemed like it was a way of finally putting sort of a brand name to something, and making sort of the masses a little more accepting. Have you found the conversations involving AI with your third party partners or on projects you've been working in have just gone a little easier since that has kind of hit the mainstream?
Yeah, so we've gone from so one of my favorite kind of industry terms in AI is they talk about various AI winters. So an AI winter, I guess some parody of like a nuclear winter or something. Like an AI winter is just a chilling effect has come across the AI industry, and there's less investment, less enthusiasm. And we were and so you see this kind of ebb and flow of enthusiasm that's gone over the 80s and the 90s. You can go back to Clippy, a little paperclip in Microsoft Office, and it was so cool at first, and then everybody ended up not liking it because it was just kind of dumb and annoying.
Yeah.
And so you go through these various degrees of enthusiasm in the market, from like war games in the 80s and Clippy in the 90s, and then there was this big burst in the early 2010s with image recognition and deep neural networks, and there was a lot of enthusiasm, and then that had really chilled, and there was less investment, more skepticism, and now we've turned it over, and there's a ton of enthusiasm, ton of investment. Capital markets are just flooding these AI startups with money, and companies are buying or investing or trying to figure out how to use. So we've gone from the other problem of trying to convince a client that if they did believe it was doable, they thought it would cost too much and be too much pain, too expensive to maintain and keep up, to now the other side of sometimes having to temper enthusiasm and being like, okay, that's a great idea. That's probably a lot more work than it's worth right now with the current state of technology, trying to find, sometimes you end up kind of on the other side, and you're trying to temper things and get them to move in a direction that is more achievable in the near term for their, business case that makes sense.
Right. People think it's like a silver bullet that's going to fix every problem as opposed to targeted sort of situations.
Yeah, and it's to a degree, I liken it. One of my favorite kind of analogies is that I think it's very similar to when the spreadsheet became widely available in the office, and at first it was just this accounting tool to balance ledgers, and then it turned into this very ubiquitous tool that gets used for all kinds of things, and people start baking stuff. You get these crazy advanced users and start baking in all kinds of formulas or little things, and so you don't really, when that VisiCalc, I think, was the first one in the 80s, like when that came out, I don't people didn't really know how that was going to change the business world, how ubiquitous of a tool that would become, and all the different use cases that would come out of that. And I do think that, we are at kind of one of those spreadsheet type moments where it's just needs to be a tool in the toolbox. It's going to be ubiquitously useful. And we can't, we can pontificate today. We can identify things today, but we can't know all of the different ways that this is going to change and impact and be useful to our employees.
So obstacles right now. It seems like we're finally getting over the fear factor, and we've gotten to the point where there's that interest. And depending on what industry you're in, we've seen a lot of people that are sort of kicking the tires. Whether that's CFOs that are trying to bring it into their companies, or senior credit managers that are trying to bring it into B2B credit departments. And I've heard you mention the phrase "chasing receivables," quote unquote, in the past. So it seems like there's that we're in the sort of investigative process right now, where people really are asking questions and considering bigger implementations after maybe doing some smaller things, or using AI in ways that they didn't really even know they were using AI yet. I think a lot of people use AI in ways that they don't realize they're using AI yet, like things like your maps when you get rerouted around an accident or something like that. So what do you see as the obstacles now, or the problems now, to kind of get us to a place where there are a lot more businesses and finance groups and departments using AI, to kind of maximize their efficiency based on the technology that's available now?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen different surveys, and we've done our own surveys, which I can't reference yet because they haven't been published yet. They will be soon. Most organizations, I think it's fair to say most, but not most by a large margin. Barely most organizations have something going here. And so that what the other side of that statement is that there's still a large number of organizations that are being risk averse around this. And so I don't want to ignore that group, right? Like, so I think that there is, particularly in the more regulated industries, some wariness in how it handles, regulated data, PII or patient information, or there's all these other kind of things to kind of explore and look at. So there's still some risk and governance work out there to do, and to help organizations get comfortable and categorize, what they are comfortable doing today and what they're not, et cetera. But I think that, like, really you're looking to turn employees from writers into editors. So, you mentioned chasing receivables. How much of that kind of process is that person, reviewing outstanding receivables and writing an email, or finding the contact info of somebody and then writing an email, et cetera, to be able to try and chase that, versus having generative AI kind of do some of the cursory analysis, come back and say, hey, I've identified these accounts. Here's the contact info. Here's a letter that I've written. This letter is different because it's the second one that we've sent, and they're 60 days past due instead of 30. This is one where, the 30 days is up, and, they had 30-day terms. So then your employees going through and just editing that, giving it a read, and able to click send. And, the examples for this cut across all of, all of your different functions and all of their kind of different capabilities where this kind of thing would be useful. Or, for example, you're somebody's looking up someone that has maybe they've got flagged or something in your system for receivables, but they want to go back and double check their contract and double check the agreement, right? Has this been entered appropriately? It says 45-day terms in the system, but like I want to go and look at the contract. And then they go and look, and the contract actually said 90 days. Somebody negotiated it way up. That's a great thing. Generative AI can kind of do that proactively for you, right? It's like, hey, I looked at the contract, I read it, payment terms say 45 days. I think this is correct. We should follow up with them, kind of thing. And so it's that stuff that can just be real time savers for people, and that's capability it's absolutely good at today. The implication to that, though, is that your contracts are appropriately curated, right? They're in the right place so that it knows where to find it, and it's knows how to find that contract based on customer, and it's not some tribal knowledge in your receivables department where it's sitting on somebody's folder or this other person's folder, and where to look through and kind of hunt for it, right? So that is kind of a little bit of the rigor that wanting to adopt this technology can bring, where you're like, okay, well, you actually kind of have to clean your room a little bit, get a little organized, and have some discipline how you create these records, and then you can realize this significant productivity increase.
Right. So, you mentioned the, freeing up people's times, from, mundane time consuming tasks and whatnot. And that's an obvious benefit. But so for those companies that are kind of the early adopters and whatnot, what are they gaining a big level of advantage, or yes or no? And if so, are there other ways that being sort of out in front of this as opposed to waiting is advantageous? And is there sort of a like a line in the sand moment where if you wait until X point you're really in trouble, if you ignore most of AI capabilities in business and finance, to that point?
Sure. That's a hard thing to measure. It's a hard thing to measure in the short term. So where I have seen it measured relative to generative AI has actually been with software developers. So the earliest use case for this, prior to the launch of ChatGPT, there was a product also powered by the company behind ChatGPT, OpenAI, that generated code for developers, integrated, into your development environment and helped you generate code. And so that was the original Copilot. So Microsoft kind of appropriated that name because it was from a Microsoft subsidiary called GitHub. They appropriated that name and put it all over Office. But before anybody had thought of that, the original Copilot was a developer. It was a Copilot for developer. And so that's evolved as the models have gotten better. And I've seen organizations that have adopted it, claim, I've seen, and I don't want to quote directly because I'm not sure what's published or what's not, but I've seen organizations that have adopted that claim low double-digit productivity increases, right? And in that kind of 10 to 20% range. I've seen some target much more and then kind of realize that less. And that's in an area where there's a lot of discrete metrics, right? It's sometimes a little bit harder to monitor the productivity of your back office workers as rigorously as you might monitor the ability to write code. But and I think where you'll see it more is when it gets into the contact centers and other things. But I know there's some studies and things going on, but I haven't seen published yet. And so I do think largely it's early days, and it's organizations are saying like, look, this is obviously a faster process than it was, but we never really benchmarked exactly how fast this process was before and studied how much time people were doing per month. So that's kind of, unfortunately, a long, rambly answer to not very well defined yet. But I think that when people see it and they see the new process, they understand intuitively that this is much faster. Then the question comes down to, what else is my employee doing with their time, right? Are they spending, maybe they're getting the same outcome, they're getting the same amount of work done, but is it of higher quality because they spent more time thinking about the challenging part instead of banging through the rote part of it? And so they were ultimately able to come out with better product at the end, even if they're coming out with the same amount of product that they got through previously. That's the kind of thing that every organization is going to have to measure on their own and decide how rigorous they want to be in this being kind of a cost takeout type play versus a quality improvement type play.
Okay. I think maybe last question here. What is, in your estimation, the most important thing that CFOs or treasurers, controllers, senior credit managers can keep in mind for the next 6 to 12 months as they're looking at AI in their business or finance functions? What do they really need to focus on to not get left behind, so to speak?
So I think that, one is the adoption question. Like I said earlier, there's still a large chunk of organizations out there that aren't adopting. So, one adoption, and then two, thinking specifically from a CFO role, that they really should be the architect of this, because it does have so many kind of financial implications, gains in employee productivity capacity, and how are you redriving that investment, and how are you going to kind of within the finance function, provide tools to your people, run your POCs, run that kind of model change, your role model change approach. There's a lot there to go through, but if I had to boil it down to one, it would be that you're driving adoption and that you're prepared for the increase in growth and capability of the technology. One of my favorite quotes from Sam Altman is that it's easy to show people that the technology has exponentially increased in capability over time. It's much harder to get them to believe that it will continue to exponentially increase in capability over time. And if your organization,
That's a great quote,
if your organization hasn't adopted and isn't out there kind of, really trying to figure out how to use this technology, what are you going to do on the other side of that exponential growth curve when your competitors have and you have not, and now they're getting to take advantage of what is no longer marginal increases and instead is kind of business changing type increases?
Okay. Good stuff. I would just say, any parting shots you want to share that we didn't get to before we wrap up?
No, this was a lot of fun. I appreciate you taking the time, and glad to be here and do this with you guys.
Okay, and thank you for joining us. I know you're incredibly busy with all your duties over at KPMG, so it really is a treat to be able to get out down and have a half hour of your time and really kind of dig into some of this stuff. I'm sure our listeners are going to be very enthused with what we've gone over today. And thank you for listening. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of the Finance Podcast. I'm Brian Chappell, and have a great day.
Thanks, Brian.